Welcome to another podcast from the heart of Spurgeon. My name is Jeremy Walker. I'm your host as we read through these sermons, and we've come to Sermon 1531 from Exodus 32 and verse 26. Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, "Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me." It was preached on the 4th of April 1880 by Spurgeon at the Metropolitan Tabernacle in Newington, and has the simple title, "On Whose Side Are You?" If you're here for the first time, welcome. If you're coming back again, then we're glad to have you. If you'd like to leave a rating or a review, that would be helpful and appreciated particularly by our friends at Media Gratiae, who are the producers of this podcast and whose material like this can be found at mediagratiae.org/podcasts. You can also sign up for a weekly newsletter where you'll get the week's featured sermon as we work our way through. And so this week, as I've mentioned, Sermon 1531, as we read from 1529 to 1535. Spurgeon plunges us straight into the history of Moses coming down from the mountain as a lone man, a solitary champion, challenging the whole nation to decide for God. He comes as a man of spiritual dignity and prayer. Heavenly communion makes a man strong. Moses had been in the secret place of the Most High. He had spoken with God face to face as a man speaks with his friend, and it was not likely that Moses should fear the face of man after having seen the face of God. He had been familiar with the sublime, and when he came down to the infinite littleness of men who had dared to liken the glory of God to the image of an ox that eats grass, Moses wore about him a natural superiority before which they all trembled and slunk away in fear. But not only this dignity, but also this prayerfulness. Be sure of this, that the man who has power with God will have power with men. If we have power with God for men, we shall have power with men for God. He that can overcome heaven by prayer, what is there that he cannot conquer? So we start with Moses, then we move in a step. So it has been in history, not once or twice, but many a time. A single determined man, full of God's Spirit, has confronted the whole mass of the people, has breasted the rushing torrent of popular prejudice, and has not only stemmed the current, but turned it in the opposite direction, even as Moses did. Being girded with the power of God, and having learned to dwell on high, the one believer has become the heroic leader of a band of earnest hearts. And then from the general historical sense to a very immediate and pressing sense. Brothers and sisters, we want in these days men and women of fixed principles. We need individuals of enlightened mind and determined will. Those who know what is right and will not deviate from it, even though they should hazard their lives, are greatly required nowadays. We want to have not one or two, but multitudes of steadfast men who, when they put their foot down, mean to abide there, and cannot be pushed from off their standing place. If any of you aspire to lead your own families and to influence your own connections in the right way, you must possess personal strength of mind of the right sort, and you must get it where Moses gained his power. You must be much alone with God and mighty on your knees. Come forth to face the wicked world with your faces radiant with the light of God. Communion with heaven must win for you divine help, that you may not be overcome of evil, but may overcome evil with good. And so you've got Spurgeon moving from the particular and more ancient history to the more general and more recent history, and then bringing it right up to the present. And he joins all the dots together and says, we need to be like Moses in this. So consider his question and command, "Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me." And in that connection, he says three important points: decision, avowal, and consecration. Decision, a man must be on the Lord's side. Avowal, let him come unto me. If he be on the Lord's side, don't skulk away in your tent, but confront the adversary. And third, consecration, for those on the Lord's side were to come to Moses, that they might do the Lord's bidding and fight the Lord's battles at all hazards. So decision, a decision upon the most sublime and important theme. Two camps, God and Satan, truth and falsehood, holiness and sin. On which side are we ranged? And Spurgeon sees, as it were, a man between the two, ready to make that decision. And he says, you have to count what's involved. Whether the man shall be for God or for his enemies will mean for that man kinship with angels or league with devils. The white robe and the everlasting song of adoring praise, or the blackness of darkness and the perpetual wailing of unending misery. Understand, says Spurgeon, what you're deciding when you make this decision. It's a dreadful thing to be standing as if you could be midway between God and the devil. For whether you know it or not, that midway place is actually on the wrong side. He who is not with me is against me, and he that gathers not with me scatters abroad. So Spurgeon says, if you're not deciding, you're already deciding. And so you need to make this decision as early as possible. Oh, that young people would think of this and not waste the best part of their lives in halting between two opinions. Happy is the young man who can say to others, while you're considering, I have decided. While you are hesitating, I have pushed on and given my heart to God. While you are temporizing, I have already entered into conflict with sin and death and hell. While you are counting the cost, I have already reckoned the reproach of Christ to be greater riches than all the treasures of Egypt. Happy he who first crosses the Rubicon of decision, drawing his sword against sin and throwing away the scabbard, that he may never make truce or treaty with the foe. It is a decision that should be made at once, O man, for death is near you, and eternity begins to dawn. And so he presses it upon the young people especially. Take heed lest you grow into a procrastinator, and halt and halt and halt, till you become such a cripple that you will halt through life, and never march with the armies of the Lord. Oh, that grace would lead each one to decide upon the spot. So a decision of this magnitude not only needs to be made quickly, but it's going to influence every subsequent decision throughout life. It's going to make a difference to every further step that you take. It's going to change the way that you live practically. The side of God, then, is in the highest and best sense the side of mankind. We best promote the interests of nations when we advance the cause of God. And so, says our preacher, I pray that our piety may be of such a practical kind that we may carry it with us into everything that we do. I like not that religion which lives in churches and is glorious on a Sunday like the beadle in his fine coat, but falls back into its ordinary shabby wear when the service is done. Give me that godliness which finds itself at home at the fireside and is in its right place in the counting-house and the workroom. True religion is meant for field and street, for polling booth and market. It gives a tincture to everything with which the man comes in contact, and find him where you will, you see that he is on the Lord's side because he's on the right side. The follower of Jesus takes that side which for a season may be unpopular, but which is, according to the law and to the testimony, right in the sight of God. Take care, then, how you make your decision as to God, since on that pivot your whole character will turn. Now, it's interesting that Spurgeon mentions here the polling booth, because the entire context of this sermon, and perhaps I should have just spelt this out at the front end, is that it's preached in the context of a general election, when people have been asked over and over again, on whose side are you? Some are enthusiastic on the one side, some on the other. But now he says you need to think less about politics and more about your standing before God. But he says your standing before God is going to influence every other judgment that you make. Your thoughts about what really matters is going to have a huge impact on the whole of your life, including the way you think about society and culture and politics. There ought, though, to be no possible difficulty about the great decision, and it's your relationship to God which ought to bind you. He is your creator, and he has made you, and he can crush you. He is your Redeemer. He has bought you with his blood. How can you be on any other side than his? He's your daily preserver, in whose hand your breath is, and can you live in antagonism to him? Everything that God is in himself and to us should make it not even difficult, but straightforward to decide whose side we are going to be on. But then he reminds us that it's sadly true that through our sinfulness, an honest and sincere and practical decision is not soon arrived at. Most men are swayed by their own interests. They're influenced by the things that do well for them. Which is the best side for me, they ask? Which will bring me the most pelf, the most profit or money, the most esteem, or the most quiet or ease? But he that is on the side of God scorns such mean considerations, and favours not that which is profitable for the present, but that which is just and right. Such a man is not going to be influenced by the fear of men, as so many are. If adversaries to truth and righteousness abound, never think of them. Do not calculate their strength, nor estimate what an attack upon them may cost you, but at once throw down the gauge of battle, and for God and for righteousness take you the right side. Then, says Spurgeon, and he's already hinted at this, the decision involves only one alternative. If you're not on God's side, you are on the opposite side. This is the point he was making earlier. No decision is already a decision. All through the Word of God, there is no preparation made for a third party. There is a very numerous body of people who try to inhabit what he calls here the betweenities. They will, if they can, go on both sides or on neither side. They want to be let alone. They wish to keep themselves to themselves and say nothing and do nothing either way. Now, there is no preparation made for you either in this world or in the next. There is no synagogue of the undecided on earth, no purgatory of middle men in the unseen world. As to this world, there is no comfort held out to you. You are not praised, but you're denounced by the Scriptures, and even cursed most bitterly for not coming to the help of the Lord against the mighty. You are regarded as enemies to God until you are his friends, and it must be so, for he that is not honest is dishonest. He that is not chaste is impure, and he that is not for God is necessarily against him. It is a matter about which a soul cannot be colourless. So far from this being possible, this matter is one about which there is usually much intensity of feeling one way or another, for God has fervent friends and bitter foes. This is, Spurgeon is telling us, really not something that people can be lukewarm about. You're either on one side or the other, decidedly and definitely. One way or another, you must have God and his Christ, or you must be the servants of Satan. Holiness must hold you, or sin will bind you. Heaven must win you and attract you to itself, or hell will mark you for its own, and downward you will descend. That brings us then to the point of avowal. Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. The Hebrew is sharper. It reads like this, says the preacher, and this is a good way to use the original languages if you have them, or if you're able to study behind the English text or whatever language you're preaching in. Who is on Jehovah's side? To me. That's the kind of force of it, and sometimes it's really helpful to go back and feel the force of the original speech and get some of its nuances and its demands. Here there's this absoluteness, this crispness. Who is on Jehovah's side? To me, to me. And that's the summons. For God, to me. So there's first of all a coming out from among the idolaters. You who are on the Lord's side are now away in your tents, whither you might have gone that you might not join with the riotous crowd. So you're hiding away now to be apart from this idolatry. You come to me in the furthest limits of the camp. If you've gone to be quiet, come into the gate of the camp to me and show yourselves. Stop hiding away. Now is the time to stand up and be counted, says Spurgeon. There is too little separation from the world nowadays among Christian professors. I do not wonder at the question a little girl asked of her mother when she'd been reading the New Testament. Mother, don't you think it would be very nice if we could all move away and go and live where there are Christians? Her mother said, Why, there are many Christians around us. Oh, no, mother, not like those I've been reading of in the New Testament. I'm afraid the child was right, though there are some New Testament Christians even here. I wish there were many more who in all things followed not the fashions of the world and the follies of the times, but walked with God in the separated path where Jesus' footsteps are seen. So this avowal, this requires you to come out from amongst the idolatrous and the wicked, and it requires you to come to the leader. Well, you might say, we don't have a Moses. Ah, says Spurgeon, you have a Christ. It is the Lord Jesus Christ who is first and foremost on the Lord's side. He proved it by his life, he proved it by his death, and this morning he bids all that are on God's side to come to him. Come and let him be your master and Lord. Come and imitate his example and keep his precepts. Come and proclaim his gospel and defend his kingdom. He that is on the Lord's side, let him come to Christ and follow the Lamb whithersoever he goes. And yet there's more to it. Come to one another. Come out, come to Christ, come to each other. You gather with others. It's birds of a feather flocking together. Friend, if I am on the Lord's side, and you are on the Lord's side, why should we be strangers to one another? There are few enough to stand up for Christ. Surely they ought to be knit together in closest affection. Unity is strength, and as we have no strength to spare, let us be united. Come forth, you that know the Lord, and avow your allegiance by joining with others who love your King. Enlist under the same captain, and inscribe your names in the same muster roll. Spurgeon says, I wish I had more energy for this. I wish I had more zeal and more drive and more oomph. I do beseech those who are not on the Lord's side not to attempt to unite with any visible church, for that would be rank hypocrisy. But I would encourage and invite and entreat and almost go to the length of commanding those who are on the Lord's side to declare themselves. Come you to us, for we also are on the Lord's side. Lend us your help, afford us your company. Let us enter into fellowship with one another, and let us be men banded together for everything that is good and true, because we are on the Lord's side. Attend to this, I pray you, and make an avowal of your decision for God as speedily as possible. In other words, once you've decided, stand up to be counted. And in the third place, with this avowal should come consecration. Those who are on the Lord's side should not merely give their names, but themselves. To be on the side of Christ is to belong to Christ, and that means you're bound to obey God's will. It's following the Lord that brings about this kind of consecration and conviction. So do not follow a church. Do not follow any great preacher, how we need to hear that today. Pin yourself to no man's sleeve. To the law and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. If everybody would do this, there might still remain diversities of judgment, but I am inclined to think that unity in doctrine and in practice would be far sooner attained by this habit than by any other means. If each one would go to the word for himself and no longer settle down in an ism learned from somebody else, we should know the truth and come together in our views of it. So says Spurgeon, this one book, the Bible, contains the religion of the true Christian so far as it can be described by letters, and the Spirit of God is promised to enlighten us as to its meaning. God grant we may never say, I do so-and-so because it is in the prayer book, or because it is according to our denominational standards. What have you to do with any book but the Bible, or with any denomination but the Church of Christ, unless it be that the book and the denomination are scriptural? Spurgeon's saying you need to be careful that you don't elevate your own affiliations above the conviction that the Scripture guides you entirely. Then, to come to the Lord is not only to be willing to obey his will, but to serve him actively and energetically. Moses said to these men whom he'd called out, gird every man his sword upon his thigh. You're not to enlist on the Lord's side to idle away your time. Hosts of people think when they get into the bosom of the church that they are to sleep there like babes in their mother's arms. The gospel coach goes by and they climb to a box seat if they can and ride. But the idea of ever drawing the coach, the idea of working for the master, enters not into their heads. The parallel might be trying to find the most comfortable seat. You're happy to be there. You don't want to serve. You just want to be the sleeper in the back. Not with us, says Spurgeon. We must throw our activities and our energies into the side which is God's, even as the tribe of Levi fought valorously against the rebellious people. And, says Spurgeon, you need to do this at all hazards and costs. This is going to be a painful duty to perform. The Levites were made executioners of their brothers who were found guilty of high treason against God their king. And it cost their hearts much to kill every man his brother or friend. But if they found them obdurate, that is, stubborn in their idolatry, they were commanded to slay them without mercy, and they did so. Is this the kind of spirit in which we serve the Lord? Now remember, we're not called to strike people physically, and there's no hatred in this kind of decision, but it's being thorough with God, and so must we be. When you join Christ's church, there must be a cutting off of right arms and a plucking out of right eyes if necessary. Notice, you're not striking at others, you're dealing with your own sins. There must be a mortifying of the flesh with its affections and lusts. We are called to a battle, and we must prepare for it and not be afraid. And so Spurgeon is beginning now to press these things closely home. He tells us, because these men were thus faithful to God, they were made the teachers of Israel ever afterward, these Levites. And if you are a follower of the Lamb, if you are indeed a soldier of the cross, it is yours also to do what God bids you. You are not to reason why, yours if necessary to dare and die, and still in all holy meekness and gentleness to maintain truth, rough and rugged though it may seem to the dainty philosophers of our day. Be ever on the side of right. So Spurgeon says there'll be people who think that you're harsh, you're unkind, you're absolutist, you're a precisionist, you're a Puritan reborn. Spurgeon says that's absolutely fine. You may publish those stern doctrines which smite the tall crest of human pride and thwart the pleasing inclinations of fleshly minds, but publish them nevertheless. God will justify you in so doing and vindicate you from all aspersions. Allow no reservations. So important for preachers. So easy for us to stroke the consciences of people. So easy, perhaps if you're in a small church especially, to see people coming in and be ready to tame what you have to say, to trim it, to take the teeth out of it in order to seem a little bit more attractive, at least in the eyes of men. No, says Spurgeon, you cannot go like that. If you are to stand and to teach for the sake of Jesus Christ, that is what you need to do. So in conclusion, the suitability of my subject to this present time. First point here, the worship of the golden calf is pretty general right now. There is far too much bowing down and cringing before the golden calf in all classes of society. He's thinking here specifically of wealth. No end of dodges are tried to get a scraping of one of the creature's hooves. Brother, you must sooner endure poverty than do a wrong thing for the sake of riches, and you must learn to value men for what they are, not for what they have. It needs not Christianity to tell you that some of the worthiest, noblest, and most kingly of men earn their bread by the sweat of their brow. When you meet them, love and honour them. On the other hand, know that some of the vilest of men have at times climbed to high places of wealth and power. Do not cringe to any man, but least of all bow to a mere money bag. Value men by their characters and not by their positions. God grant that none of us may ever be found worshipping the golden calf. Some people want to be a part of society. They want to get a reputation and to move in the right circles. Well, from what little I do know of this wonderful thing called society, says Spurgeon, you can feel the sarcasm dripping from his lips, I have felt no ambition to partake in its felicities. And yet to get into society I have seen men fling away their principles, forsake their friends, stifle their consciences, abandon their church fellowship, and become traitors to their God. Forsooth, they are successful in business and hope to rank among the county families, and so they leave those who love them to entertain at lavish cost those who sneer at them. The Lord save those of you who are prosperous from being thus degraded. So Spurgeon has no time for social climbing, but he does have time for the excellent word forsooth, which means that we might need to recover that word. A few forsooths might do us well. Then the next thing, the superstitions, which are too often associated with religious worship. Here's Spurgeon's thinking again of the degeneration, the religious degeneration of his own day. The worship of what is called the Blessed Sacrament is as vile an idolatry as the worship by the Egyptians of onions and other pot herbs which grew in their own gardens. There's not a pin to choose between the one and the other, and yet this is getting to be common. Bread, which is nothing but bread, and when you've said all you can say over it still remains bread, must not be produced in a court of law, or if it be so produced, a great bishop, who should know better, assures his brethren that he has taken care that it is reverently consumed. I wonder what became of the mouldy bread. Oh, that ever I, an Englishman, should be forced to believe that another Englishman in this 19th century reverences the baker's paste. Great God in heaven, is this the country of Latimer? Is this the land of gospel light? Or have we clean gone back to Rome and all its idolatries? Spurgeon's talking about the creeping influence of Rome, not just in Roman Catholicism, but in the Church of England in his day. And we've seen the fruit of some of that in our own high churchmanship in our society. Spurgeon says, be stiff and straight about this. Do not pay religious honour to anything which can be seen by the eyes. Worship no symbol, however ancient. Worship God only. Then he talks about the popular sports, the vain amusements that came in the time of the Archbishop Laud, Laud. My brothers, he says, I want you to feel that you are on God's side about this. For every symbol, I repeat it, whether image, picture, bread, or whatever you please, must be denounced if it be set up as an object of worship. Whereas the bread and wine are appointed by our Lord Jesus to be used for a memorial of him, they are so to be used with loving thoughtfulness, but we dare not pay the slightest worship to them, for that were to make sin of the blackest dye out of the tenderest of all memories. And so then, there's this sinful amusement which has such charms for many. Beware, I pray you, of every amusement which prevents your redeeming the time or tends to pollute the mind. There are recreations of a healthy, manly, refreshing kind, but those which are of no possible service to you are unprofitable. What do you see? What do you watch? What do you indulge in? The same spirit which made the Puritan refuse to reverence the so-called holy days and holy things of superstition led him so to reverence God and his sacred law that he would not join in the debasing amusements of the period, which were indeed so gross as a rule that even irreligious people would not in these times endure them. We have somewhat of the same protest to bear, and we must not flinch from it. We have better joys than the wanton and the foolish can bring to us. We say of a pastime, if this is pure and clean, if this is health-giving to the body, or restful and invigorating to the mind, we are not led by any old-fashioned whim to denounce it, and we do not denounce it. But if about it there is a taint of vice, or a temptation that way, or if it be mere folly, we cannot endure it. So both the vile and the empty, says Spurgeon, we turn away from it. How much of social media consumption would fall into the categories of the vile and the empty? We venture not where Jesus could not have gone. We would not go where we should be afraid to die or should tremble to hear the trumpet announcing the coming of the Lord. Stern teaching this. Are you enough on the Lord's side to bear it? I need to think about that, do you? This day of general tampering with principle demands a firm decision for God. The plain Christian will do no evil that good may come. He loathes the Jesuitical notion. He believes that it is a great evil to attempt to do good by doing evil. To him, truth, right, the teaching of God, the will of Christ are supreme objects. Oh, that you all possessed this spirit and were steadfast in it. In your family circle, in your business everywhere, be true, be thorough, be upright, be godlike, be Christ-like. And may the divine Spirit help you to this for Jesus Christ's sake. Well, I hope you feel the force of those exhortations at the end. That decision that you need to make, that avowal that you need to display, and that consecration which you need to pursue. It's a wonderfully practical sermon that we've dealt with. It's a rallying cry in the context reminding us that the most important decision we will ever make is not made at the ballot box in a worldly election, but is made in the sight of heaven and has to do with the God who calls us to himself. Friends, I trust that will be a blessing to you, and I hope that you, together with me, will make changes where we need to in order to show that we are indeed on the Lord's side. Do join us again, God willing, next week when we'll be looking at Sermon 1540. We'll read from 1536 to 1542, but 1540 is a sermon entitled The Mediator, Judge and Saviour. Please come back and join us then, and thank you for listening today.